Good morning, Adam.
It's more energy. How'd you get here?
I drove.
You did?
Yes.
Did you have a hard time finding a parking?
At first I did, and now I discovered the park, and there were different places to park, set up my car and at the park, and there we are.
Okay.
Yeah, very close.
Good. I wasn't sure because the G is just beyond on the other side of the park there, at the other end of the...
I love WKCR. I love that station, and I love what they play in the morning, so I just enjoyed it.
Good plug for a radio show.
Yeah.
So we're here in Williamsburg, and we're over coffee and water and good friends. That's nice. And ostensibly because you made another film, you were so prolific these days.
Well, this was a film that was part of my life for most of my life.
That's right. something like 30 years you've been working on this?
Yeah. I realized as I was putting the date on the film, 2020, that the very first image I shot was from 1984, so it's over 30 years.
But when you were shooting, you were just shooting. Did you have this idea that you were making a film when you started the filming?
In 1991, I started making this film.
In earnest?
Yes.
Okay, so we are now at 2020 as of yesterday, so we are just shy of 30 years.
Yeah.
Wow. And I guess you could argue that because you are using footage, archive, from 1984, that it does go back. But we have to have people call in or write in and say, does a film begin from the conception or does it begin from...
That's such a good idea. Especially with my films. The films are so integrated into the life that I'm living. So they're not all as personal as Film About a Father Who, but they mark something that was going on in my life. So I can think, what movie was I making at that time?
Yeah, sure.
And then it's like an opening to what else was going on.
You can kind of make order out of your life a little bit better. Not maybe that much better, but a little bit better when you have those benchmarks, I guess. Wait, so it's again, you just sort of squeezed in the title. You snuck it in there. A film film about a father who. It's called Film About a Father Who. And
so Film About a Father Who, as a title, was inspired by a film by Yvonne Rainer, who has been a very important, influential filmmaker, thinker, theorist, artist in my life. And she made a film in the 70s called Film About a Woman Who. But she had an ellipsis after that, so it was ... But I just had it in my mind, and I've been calling this film Film About a Father Who for 10 years, and it's stuck.
And what is it, since you've had 10 years to kind of let it marinate, the title, and you've now finished the film, do you feel like in a way it's speaking to and defining itself what the title means specifically? Even though I know you borrowed it and it's a variation on an existing title, but sometimes that happens.
Yeah. Well, I should say this is my very first conversation about the film.
That's amazing. I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
So I have no... quote, canned reactions to anything.
You don't have marketing language at your fingertips here.
No, not at all. So
that's great.
This is very exciting, and so
this podcast
you will
allows
hear me thinking.
Right, that's great, and this podcast allows you the opportunity to kind of start to think about these things, and then of course, if you say anything you regret, we can fix that, but hopefully not.
So I'll just say this: that I'm very interested in family trees. And I'm very interested in the way that grammar works and the way that we put together matrices or a kind of structure for understanding where we are in the world and our place in the universe. And I think the sentence and the chart by which you understand who were your parents and who were the parents of your parents, and then who are your children and what are all those connections, and then there are empty spaces, and then there was an activity. I don't know if you did this when you were in junior high school or middle school. If you ever did diagramming of sentences, and the and the end credits in my film are kind of like
I love
an
it.
homage to diagramming. I wanted them to look like diagramming and to look like a family, kind of a family tree, and the both.
Yeah, I can see
so
that.
it's the idea of one thing spilling, like a branch coming off, a trunk coming, and then a twig after that. And so these relationships of the larger whole and then the offshoots. And a diagram, to diagram a sentence is to take what you would call the main trunk of the sentence, and then you have these other appendages like film. This is a film about a father, but this is just a part of that film about a father who. And so who, if you, in the English language, you feel like there's something that runs after it, but you don't quite know what it is. So there's a kind of anticipation, and a way that also anybody could absolutely everyone has a father, even if you didn't know that person, but you had somebody who came before you. So you have these descriptions and these attachments that you can either add or subtract. So that's everything after the who.
So it's for the audience.
Well, it's also saying that this is it's like this is a portrait, but you don't quite know. It's not a portrait of a person specifically who will announce himself. You're going to have to navigate that.
Yeah, well, the film is a great example of that demanding that from the audience. It really requires, I mean, you feel like as much as you're getting to know him, he's still an anomaly on some level. He's hidden behind all of your testimonies, which are, as the film goes on, keeps getting larger in number. I've known you for 5 or 6 years or something around there, right? I did not know anything about what some people refer to as a secret family.
Yeah.
And
I actually, I have 8 siblings,
which is
but I didn't
stunning.
know 2 of them until just a few years ago. So I'm very interested in this idea of that we call.
Wendell will come out.
Oh, okay.
Wendell.
This notion of there being a nuclear family, this idea of this kind of space of comfort and aware and kind of acknowledgement that this is how I define myself. These are my parents, and these are the progeny from those 2 parents, and for the most part, people do know that, but there are other ways that people create parallel lives, and I know. Honestly, men tend to do that more than women. It's just easier biologically. I always had a hunch that my dad might have had other children, but I didn't know it, and I certainly didn't realize that there was a sister who was well into her 30s, and I didn't know anything about her until a few years ago. But when you meet a person who has shall I say, shared DNA, you do feel this bond, and also curiosity, and also a little fear, like how can I expand my sense of who I am by also understanding the people who have entered that nuclear zone.
It's fascinating to me when people find out history, something about their own history, their lives that are so central on some level, so late in their life. I don't wish it upon them, because I think that's not an optimal experience to go through. Maybe there is an advantage to it somewhere, though. Maybe because it does require you to reassess and think of yourself in a new way.
I'm really glad you said that, because there's a word people use a lot these days, like they say, "Oh, that's complicated," but sometimes you find yourself at a plateau, and you think, "I know exactly who I am. This is the this is how I define myself.
That's
This
right.
is paradigm for my paradigm for what a family is this, even a divorced family, because it's so
Sure.
common. But when you shift that, you also have to awaken something, like awaken how you love other people and awaken how you embrace them and whether you care, when are their birthdays and will you call them to see how they're feeling or if they just went through a struggle or crisis.
Yeah, do they want you to call them? Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of families, I don't know. I was going to say a lot of families have that, experience that, but maybe I could be completely wrong. I don't know. I'm just saying because my family, it happened in my family, my cousins, who I'm very close to. I just saw them recently twice because we celebrate Thanksgiving and then Hanukkah. So I just saw them the other day, and I can talk about this because it's not nobody. It's just nobody knows who these people are who listen to the show. But they found out. My aunt has kept the secret from them that my uncle, who's long since passed away, and she's remarried and been remarried for many, many years, much longer than she was to her first husband. But with her first husband, she had 3 children who are now grown and have children, and and it came out that my uncle, my original uncle, couldn't have children. And so they agreed to have maybe adoption at that time, 50, 60 years ago, wasn't quite so easy or quick or what have you. So they went around that and they had biological, what do you call somebody who fills a sort of surrogates. Thank you. And it turns out that one of my cousins, who's a child of this family, died of cancer some years ago, Andrea, and she was a religious Jew. She spent most of her adulthood in Israel, living in Jerusalem. It turns out her dad's not Jewish. It's and one of my living male cousins, one of her brothers, has the same biological father, and he always thought he was Jewish, 100% Jewish, and he only found out. And this all spurred in because of 23andMe.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, this has changed families. A lot of families it's busted open all these secrets. So I'm just saying, this blew me away. Not only because of that fact that there were these other biological realities in my family, but my father and my mother knew about this going back to when they were in their 20s or 30s and kept the secret from me and my sister. I could tell her, but it's not my business to tell her, Anyhow,
well,
I'm giving you this long story, but
it with this film, the way that it will open up conversations and also conversations around the notion of secret. But one of the reasons I think that the word secret within context of talking about family even exists is because we're always trying to figure out how we have played by the rules or our parents have played by the rules and how at times they didn't play by the rules either. Sometimes, usually intentionally, they deviated. So they wanted to be part of, mainstream America or middle class or whatever. They wanted to at least garner that respect or that acknowledgement that they are who they appear to be, and even to their most intimate family members.
Right.
But so often we take a detour. I wouldn't even call it a mistake, I think my dad was not a rule player at all.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to that. Right.
Yeah, but he tried at certain points.
Was that kind of but I feel like his motivation, because we'll talk a little bit more about who your dad really is, so people have a context. But it seems as though maybe his primary motivation was to sort of spare your mom's feelings to spare her or you guys.
Or us or his mother.
Maybe, and his mother, of course, his mother, who's a major figure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moi.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny to talk to somebody now.
Right.
And you know a lot of the details. And Well, one of the things that was interesting to me as I was making this film was to try to look for other, let's say, models for the way that we create or like understand another human being. So I just want to say that goes back to 2 other films that I've made. One of them is called States of Unbelonging, when I made a film about a total stranger. And another film is called The Last Happy Day, and I made a film about a relative who I knew through letters that he had written, and I knew a lot about him. I knew a lot about the way his head worked. He'd been pretty much part of the only branch of my family that had stayed in Europe during World War II, and the sort of main subject character in States of Unbelonging was a woman who, a mother and a filmmaker who lived in Israel, Palestine, and had died in a terrorist action. And I tried to kind of comprehend what was going on in Israel, Palestine through that situation. So I started years ago thinking I want to understand how one person can get enough into another person to feel a connection, or maybe we never can. Maybe we're always just solipsis and floating around in our own heads, and nothing else really exists in our. But so I knew I wanted to make a film about my father in that trilogy, and ultimately it's the last film I made, and it's been the hardest because sometimes the person with whom you have the most intimacy, you take things for granted, or also there's the notion of what we leave for the world. So the first person I made the film about had made films, so I kind of understood her that way. My distant cousin, whom I never met, but was an extremely interesting person, I knew through letters and books he wrote. And so here's my dad, and he's like many, many other people in the world. He didn't have an art. He didn't have a journal. So in a sense, it was like trying to understand a person through the people who are around him, or like a Cubist painting. That's really been important to me, the way Picasso or Braque would have a portrait of a person, but it would have many different facades, so that you saw that person almost from the back at the same time that you saw the front, as you were trying to construct a notion who that person is.
Wouldn't you feel so? I mean, how can you not be so close to this particular subject that you wouldn't feel protective and concerned, like the bias that there has to be?
I'm very,
because you have your brother, your biological brother. Well, they're all biological siblings here, I guess, but your the brother you grew up with and your sister who you grew up with are in this film, and of course your mother, your grandmother. And
my mom.
And your mom. They're all so cool.
Yeah.
Do you feel a sense that you have to protect them on some level as you're editing this film?
That is okay, Adam, that's what causes me to wake up in a sweat almost every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is a critical issue. And as you know, I've made a lot of films. Sometimes I think I make 2 different kind of films. One, like, I don't think you've seen The House of Science or Which Way's East, but I've made a lot of films that are essay kind of films, where I really reveal quite a bit about myself and the way I'm thinking and who I am, and even my body, and then I make another kind of film where I'm exploring something beyond my domestic universe. This is my domestic universe, and I've had a lot of hesitation about basically opening up this curtain and saying, hey, this is the life I've led. And I do feel vulnerable about it. I feel super vulnerable, and almost everyone in my family has seen the film already before I'm releasing it to the world, and they gave it the approval.
They did.
Not all of them have seen it. Some people will see it like for the first time at some of the screening. So it's going to be at well, we'll talk about
Slam
that.
Dance?
Slam Dance.
You can
and
tell
then
these things are
part
public.
Okay, yeah. So it's
Or
going to
when
be
I
at Slam
put this
Dance.
up, and it'll be public.
Sure. It's going to be at Slam Dance as the opening night movie.
Wow.
On the 24th and 27th of January. And then it'll be in New York City.
At that New York City screening, since it sounds like you can't say that right now.
I can, because it's going to be announced in the next 2 days or so.
Okay, yeah, and we're not
So
posting
it's going to
this.
be at the Documentary Fortnight, which is an annual event at the Museum of Modern Art.
In which you've opened before, by the way, I can say, because I've been witness to that.
It's going to be February 11th and 14th.
Is that are you the opening night film for Doc Fortnight?
I don't think so. No, I'm not, because it opens on February
You've opened it
8th.
recently. So
I've done opening and closing of that festival.
Did we open or close it then?
I think we had the closing night.
Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm misremembering that.
But I want. You asked me the question about like the vulnerability in a sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's a controversial film.
Yeah. I had 36 cuts of this film or so. I mean, that's not abnormal. Lots of people do that in the digital world, where I had things in and had things out.
Right.
And also, in the end, what I found most compelling for me was the notion of family. Like, there was a lot more I could have said about my father's life. Of course, I didn't have film footage of it, but this is from it's a subjective point of view. It's it's my hope that like a photograph, you show the black and the white and then all the grays in between. So I wanted to be honest about my frustration and rage, as well as my forgiveness and love. I hope that's there.
I'm going to be objective and not say.
Okay.
Because I feel like it's really the audience's, to experience.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say, I'm not a film critic here, but I do want to now take a step, because we talked about filmmaking, a personal approach as well as just the craft. To a degree, that's what we've been talking about, and the choices and exploring the subject matter. And I do want to now talk about your dad, because I think it's important people have that understand, who I think I've met once or twice. I think I definitely
have too.
At MoMA. I know I met him.
He's very supportive. He loves to come to premieres.
Oh, I'm sure.
And he loves to go out of his way to be there on a exciting evening. He really has been a great father in that way.
He's a champion of yours, and I'm sure Ira's too.
Yes,
right, because your brother makes a very different type of film, but it's he's making narrative films, right? More traditional, I guess you could say, in the sense of. But your dad. Okay, first of all, you have two siblings you grew up with in your.
Yeah. We were all born in the 60s. I'm the oldest of all.
Of the three.
Yeah.
So there's Dana, who's your younger sister, and Ira, who's your brother, and your dad is Ira Sr.
Yes.
And you grew up in Memphis. You're Jews. Did you grow up specifically in a Jewish environment? I just never really knew that. I mean, I know there is a Jewish culture there.
It was in Memphis in the 60s, 70s. There was a very clear delineation between Reform, conservative, and Orthodox. Yes. So now I feel like so many people just identify as Jewish.
Right.
They don't care about that. But I grew up in a Reform temple, we called it. And both my parents were born Jewish. My father identified as Jewish, but was completely secular.
Right.
And though he grew up in a more Jewish family, like he did. Parts of his life were spent in Jersey City, and he was bar mitzvahed and things like that.
Was Ira bar mitzvahed?
My brother was not bar mitzvahed.
Yeah. I wasn't either. Mm-hmm. Just mentioning until I was 40. But go ahead, continue.
Oh, you should be proud. And I was not bat mitzvahed. So we had a pretty, I didn't it wasn't exclusively or sort of segregated Jewish community, but there was a fair
Yeah. I just try to get a handle on how you grew up. Now, your dad and your mom in that time when you were growing up, 60s, 70s, what was your dad's? Was he already? He was an unusual guy, right? He was didn't really live within the lines. Let's put that.
Yeah. My parents got divorced in the early 70s, but I'm surprised they lasted that long. And but my dad was very involved in political activities and I even wrote a poem about it, like very keen on the impeachment of Richard Nixon and involved with the ACLU and just like normal, sort of the legalization of marijuana, which he smoked a lot of, and he even ran for office.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a super big part of his life and everything, but he ran under Vote the Rascals Out. But
was this
definitely he did not win. And he was kind of like a hippie businessman. And once he decided to run for office in Memphis, then people would take pictures of him smoking pot or whatever, and that was not going to happen.
So he's like an assemblyman, that kind of thing, or
something like that. Okay. City council. But my dad did, and he for when we were kids, he decorated a big yellow school bus into sort of a floating hippie house, and he ended up living downtown when nobody else did, and renovated a house that had basically was derelict when it had been abandoned, and it was this old Victorian house, and it just was incredible. But it was definitely not in the suburbs, and it was a kind of rough neighborhood. So it was sort of like
Memphis is
scary
edgy.
To go around on the street.
Yeah.
At that time, in fact, I was flashed once with my sister. We were walking to the grocery store down the street, but it was fun. It was kind of. It was kind of
just
different.
trendy then. I'm sure it scarred you both, but it was just a trendy guy who was trying to flashing people.
Yeah, he was a trendy guy flashing people. That's the way to put it. But in a way, I think that I very much see that who I am is, you try to divvy up how am I very much like my mother and how am I like my father. And my dad was comfortable in any situation.
Right.
And was not someone who, well, he's still alive, but, who sort of said, well, I only spend time in, with professionals. And he's one of the least class conscious people I have ever met.
Or judgmental.
At all.
Right.
So there's a real openness to him that way. And I think that was kind of fantastic and definitely left an imprint with me.
Sure.
And also the notion of if you wanted, like in documentary film, we sort of say, well, the first thing is that you have to be willing to knock on the door and ask somebody questions, even if you don't know those people. And he was that kind of person, like, impetuous and open to adventure and whatever might be going on the other side of the door.
Right. Should we say, though, even within there, people can be cautious or thoughtful, and that sometimes they would not, like, in other words, one could say, where is he perilous? Like, is he to the point of being perilous?
That's a really good point.
Because some people who are adventurous also don't drag their kids into a neighborhood that might be dangerous for them. Or they smoke pot and drive
in my
or
childhood
whatever.
Where I felt vulnerable, and I know my sister and brother did too.
It was a different time, but
it was a different time, but we were not, and I think that's really insightful on your part, that the film makes me feel vulnerable, but I also felt vulnerable in a lot of different contexts with my dad. And as a child, I felt like I wanted to assimilate. I wanted a dad who didn't drive a convertible that sort of reeked of pot.
Yeah.
And I talk about that in the film, that he had these two Cadillac convertibles and kind of run down, but they were basically twins, so that he could sort of, if one broke down, the other could be used. And it was kind of both extravagant and strategic. And he was like that.
Yeah.
So sometimes you would feel, well, I'll say another thing. Another reason I felt vulnerable in his universe was that he never locked his door. So he lived in a neighborhood that was not very particularly residential, was downtown before people were moving downtown in Memphis.
Right. You weren't gentrifiers.
Yeah, not yet. It was not gentrified.
I understand.
And then to not lock the door meant
Right.
you were there and you didn't know who was going to walk in at any time of day or night.
Or who would be there if you walked in?
How did you figure that out? That's exactly true, because it was a big old Victorian house and he had multiple people living all over the house.
He did?
Yeah.
So like people that he knew.
Friends, or just like people who didn't have anywhere to stay. So
Right.
we had a room and we thought it was our room,
I
and then
didn't
we
know
would
this.
go
I
and
just
we'd
figured-
open a drawer and there'd be somebody else's clothes. So that happened all the time. So there was a sense of, and children want a sense of
Continuity,
confidence
confidence.
and like that
Security.
security
and predictability.
So predictability was never
Out the door.
And I think there's actually a line in the film where my sister and I talk about getting in the car, or I'm talking about getting in the car with her in Bali, and as it was often the case, we didn't know where we were going. We were with my dad on a trip, and I was actually making my first documentary film. And then we end up at the airport, and he picks up somebody, and we didn't even know who she was, and she ended up becoming my dad's girlfriend, then wife. And we'd never even heard of her, and she just popped in the car. So there was often that where strangers would arrive, and we didn't know
Right. Yeah.
they were.
And they're working at it as a disadvantage. I mean, too. I know you and your sister are children, so you come first in this priority-wise. But also the other person is thrown into this chaos.
Well, I tried.
Chaos
That's
is a
something
good
I
word.
tried to do in the film.
Your dad's creating chaos all the time.
That's very perceptive of you.
I don't know. I mean, it seems kind of not. It seems very obvious.
Yeah.
So I don't know how
Okay.
perceptive.
But to use that word,
yeah.
it was an emotional chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
All the time.
And a practical one too. I mean, he's living in creating this house.
Yeah.
What a world.
Yeah. And that's why there were one of the, let's say, threads or themes that I was trying to find out is how you can find like compassion for someone when you also maybe resent them. Like they're coming into your life, but
Yeah.
you want to be a nice girl.
Right.
And you don't know how long this new person is going to be part of your life. And so you're always I was always trying to assess, is this person going to stay? Is this person in the long term, like here for the long term? And so that confusion, which is very different from the model of what a nuclear family is, when you don't even have to think who's so-and-so and how do I love them, and how was really unsettling. Yeah.
I don't know how you turned out as well as you did. Because like we said a minute ago, kids need, well, we say they need, but they certainly yearn for convention and predictability and these things, but none of those things existed for you. So where is inculpability? Is your mom, who didn't create, who there's this chaos we know your dad's guilty of creating, right? For better, for worse. But where is your mom in all this? Is she in this house, Victorian house in downtown Memphis, or is she living somewhere else?
Oh no! My parents were very divorced by then.
Right. So you were with him part of the time at that, right?
We didn't
floated?
live with him.
Okay.
We would spend the night there, so that
Right.
was a difference. My mom, I had to say, she's very, very, very grounded, gave us a total sense of security, but she always felt it was important that we had a deep relationship with our dad, and that we could manage it, and that she wasn't going to micromanage it. And I respect that, because I think that that you have to develop specific relationships with each parent and not go through one to the other.
Right.
So we just had to learn to make that work. And she gave us so much anchoring that I think that was key to
stability.
Like our core.
Okay. I'm just kind of curious because the film isn't really letting you know exactly where that part of it. So I was just kind of curious because this could explain your being a stable person, for instance, and you have your own children and you've raised them quite stably, as far as I can tell. So your mom lived not in downtown. Your mom lived
more in so there's
different neighborhoods on the outskirts. Yeah, I get it.
She lived right in Memphis, but not in the downtown. She had a house with a yard, and it was
These are the typicals of most cities.
Yeah,
New York isn't typical.
Yeah. So, and I have to say, I deeply respect, and I have great gratitude to my mom for agreeing to be in this film, because it also is vulnerable for her, and it was a hard time for her, and she's very open that what she was looking in the film, that what my mother was looking for in marriage was not what she got, but she also appreciated the kind of wild side that my father offered to her for a certain time, and then it was enough.
Your dad was kind of all id, right? I mean,
I never understood the words super. I mean, I would say I learned the word super ego, ego, and id very early when I understood that my dad didn't really have a super ego.
Right.
He wasn't following anybody else's rules but his own. And if he was aware of those rules, it was how to strategically move around them.
So your mom was attracted to that. I mean, was he, was he having these alliances or affairs with, because I don't know that he thought of them as affairs, but was he sneaking and trying to be, duplicitous, or is it, again, that is an example of what you just described, maybe of learning how to get around. He had to learn how to get around those conventions or those, so that's when he applied it. Or it wasn't part of his nature to hurt.
I think one of the things that I was trying to explore in the film is the difference between secrets and living an alternative life.
Right. Yes.
And if you call it secrets, then you live a very conventional life, and then you present to live a very conventional life, but you don't. If you call it alternative, then you are very open and transparent in your willingness to live like a bohemian. The thing was, he was neither of those, because he was trying to he's an older man now, so it's very different. But it's almost like a sociological study. What group do you where do you identify? Are you part of the American middle class? Are you part of like the hip? We knew lots of hippies when other people who were in our like elementary school didn't know it. You know what I'm saying? And they weren't just young people. They were people who were in their 40s and 50s, but they were like bohemian. So that was kind of cool. And my dad knew all the arty people in Memphis, but he wasn't even arty.
Right. And the families, the other children that he sired, that's such a weird word to use, but the other children he had in other relationships, did that start while he was still married to your mom, right?
No,
that didn't. So they were all subsequent. Okay.
Yeah. That didn't start till the 80s.
Oh, okay. And this is a big part of the film. I mean, his, some of whom you knew about, some of whom you didn't, right? There's 8 siblings from relationships he had. 3?
6.
6 relationships. 6.
Well, he had many more than that.
Right.
But 6
It's amazing
mothers
that he was just so many people were attracted to him. I mean, he's an attractive guy. Obviously he's very, at some level, very charismatic, and the same chaos that we've been talking about. It must just also carry with it a certain amount of appeal to women.
Yeah. It's an interesting,
What else explains
I think
it?
I think I was trying to understand like the nature of how do you being a man in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and being a father and being a partner, and all of those things. We have expectations, and so my father has given parts of all of those in his role in my life and my siblings' life and in his various partners' lives. But then he also has like he draws lines and then he moves, and he also has a tendency to move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not, it doesn't always come, actually one of the things that I played with in terms of creating credits for the film, because I wanted it to work in a conceit with some of the things I was exploring. I didn't go too far with it because it seemed like a model that maybe was too obvious. But since my dad had 9 children, I started to think about the 9 planets in the world, and in the solar system, not the world, in the solar system. And then that you would have this sun. And so the sun both draws in and nourishes, but also kind of can burn. So
there needs to be distance, right?
Yeah. So, and the planets move in different orbits. I don't know if I'm using the right words,
mm-hmm.
but have different connections or needs or something. So I didn't really go any further with that, but it was something in my mind. And some of the planets, we have these secret planets. There's another planet. I didn't even know there was.
And then all of a sudden, it turns out one of the planets may not even be considered a planet anymore.
Yeah, all
after
of that
hundreds of years.
Actually, as a conceit, works with my
Jupiter?
movie. I think so. Yeah. And so that was kind of fun to. We thought about it. I was editing the film with Rebecca Schappas, who was now become a dear friend, and was a former student of mine, and,
mm-hmm.
and this is definitely the biggest editing project she'd ever tackled. But we had so many materials, from original material shot on VHS, videotape, to Super 8, to regular 8, to 16 millimeter, to high 8, to mini DV, to digital, all of it.
Yeah.
Even cell phone material. So it's really covers the technology from the last 35 years, media technology. And so she helped me to organize that and to edit the film. And it was actually really helpful to have these other eyes involved, because I was trying to navigate the notion of context, and not how much context do I want. And she would often say, you don't need to explain and you can't, and we don't have time, and so I wanted to keep it kind of spare.
Mm-hmm.
And she was super helpful, and we would talk about this idea of the sun and the planets.
Mm-hmm. Well, the film culminates in a family meeting, a family gathering. I assume, was this in your living room?
It's
Brooklyn?
in my brother's living room.
Okay.
It was the first time that we were all together.
How many?
One of my siblings was there on the phone.
Okay.
But essentially that was the first time that all 9 of us were in the same room. And I had to work really hard to make it happen.
I can't imagine.
I had to, buy plane tickets.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then
that was the most expensive part of the film. Getting all the people together.
Biggest line item. Yeah. Was right. But
yeah. I mean, this film has basically, there's no crew. There is an editor and a composer. And Stephen Vitiello was the composer for the music. But it has a lot of characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're meeting them right through to the end. I mean, so you had everybody one by phone in that room.
Yep.
It's a lot of pressure to have a moment, because it's, you want to have a moment with a kind of like therapy or breakthrough or something, right? You at a moment like that, you don't want to just sit around and just, I guess, share memories, right? So
yeah. I actually think that bringing a group of people together who have this very, very strong notion of who they are in relationship to each other, and the thing is with if you're a child, you have a perception of who your parent is and how you define yourself by that parent. You are either similar to them or very different. You either believe they love you or you doubt they love you, but it's intense. That's a word that's kind of overused these days, but it is. So you're always trying to parse that out, like who am I in relationship to these two people, your parents. So to have a room with 9 people who have been trying to figure that out their whole lives that's going to be revealing in some ways. And I think that they were all quite open with me, and some of the conversations had never been expressed. But I also had one-on-one conversations with everybody in the film
prior to. Yeah,
and one of the things there's 2 things that I learned about let's call it monologue or voiceover or narration, or just kind of, you could even say an open state, like self-discovery or something like that. One of the things that I learned was that I love doing interviews in absolute darkness, because, at least with this film, I did most of them in closets and darkness, because otherwise I've found that my siblings were always looking at me for validation, or like whether I was surprised by what they said or whether I agreed with them, or that kind of like the way
cues.
You nod, cues. They were always looking for cues. And I wanted them to, let me have some water. So, and I'd never done that before. Sorry, I had a cold.
Yeah.
But when we went into a dark space, they entered their own minds in a much, much, much deeper way.
Sure.
So that was a breakthrough. The other thing was that when I did the voiceover for the film, I tried to write it out. So it wasn't just voiceover, but it's like an essay film. So how did I feel about things? And, I was trying to put pen to paper. And I did that a little bit. And then I found that I was kind of filtering too much and censoring. So what I did was I actually also went into darkness with headphones and a microphone, and I would just speak. And then I would transcribe that, and then I would work on the narration from that. And that worked out. It was much freer and much more...
Because then you have a script and I've sworn you're going to stick to it.
Yeah.
Like it's like somebody else handed it to you and you're going to act it out.
And when I hand wrote it, it was too literary.
Right.
And when I hand wrote it, I thought about the word choices.
Yeah.
But when I just spoke it, then I had the chance to change that, and then I went into a recording studio and recorded it properly, let's say. But to do it the first time as kind of let's call it a rant, or like a just exploration, and I didn't know where it was going, worked so much better.
Yeah.
I actually did something else that was like such a treat, kind of an extravagance. So I would just talk and talk and talk. It might be for 2 hours. And then, and I did that at Yaddo at a artist residency.
Colony.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then from Yaddo, I sent it to a transcription service. They transcribed it in maybe 2 days and sent it right back to me. And then I worked on it.
Yeah.
And it was such a great process.
Everybody who's ever done any transcribing, if you've done it a handful of times, you've had it. It's the worst.
And it's not that expensive to pay for someone else to do it.
No, it's worth it if you got just have somebody else transcribe or use some sort of service.
And all of a sudden, I got a Word document that had. It was like a treat that had it had basically the skeleton for my voiceover for this movie. And so that was a breakthrough. I really enjoyed working that way.
So, I mean, I often ask this question, and it applies here maybe more than ever, is like, what did I'm sure all your siblings have now seen, I'm sure.
Not all of them have seen it. Because
Okay.
I have 8, and I would say
A couple of them
have not seen it yet, but they will see it soon.
Are you inviting everybody to these premieres?
Some of them are coming to Slam Dance.
Right.
Some of them are coming in New York. And then I haven't decided whether I'm going to try to show it in Memphis. I don't know if I'm showing it in Memphis. It's kind of up to my mother.
Oh, yeah. Of course.
And so I will figure out a place, or I'll send it to them. But
That makes sense.
it's kind of challenging to figure that out.
I bet. Yeah, as that family gathering shows, it is complicated. This is in no way like a completely cathartic situation. This is opening something up, and what's good is everybody is at least signing off on that, opening this conversation up, and it brings with it a lot of complicated feelings and pain and anger, as we started the conversation with, of your own, and your father in the center of it in a way. He was sitting there in that meeting. That's right, he was there.
He was not there he came later, but he was definitely not there while we were having the conversation.
Okay, so because I remember him sitting with you guys, but maybe I'm just conflating.
He was not there.
Okay.
And
he's also not willing to, at this stage anyway, he's not willing to explore these things anymore. Is that?
I think that...
Not in a group anyway. Maybe he would be one-on-one off camera or something. But is he able to? Where's he at? Where's your dad at?
He's very emotional about this movie.
He is.
He actually... I will say that he cried when he saw it. But he also... It's the life that we led, and so I didn't hold back.
Yeah.
I think he respects it. Like, I asked him if he wanted to come to the premiere in New York, and I said, you don't have to, and he really wants to come. So.
Well, the audiences, I'm sure, are going to demand that he participate. He won't
be able to speak
after
the film.
Okay.
But he will be there.
Okay. And are you talking about
reasons.
Mental health? Or
vocal. He has a disconnect.
Okay.
A little with speaking a little bit.
Okay. Did that sneak up on? Was that recent, or was it just kind of developed over the last bunch of years?
About the last 3 years.
3? Mm-hmm. Okay. Because that's what all of a sudden my dad is just not. I'm just dad. Why he'll say a few words. He'll say completely cogent and rather
appropriate.
Appropriate. Thanks for the question. It's not like he's just rambling in any way. And I say, "Are you understanding? Are you following what we're talking about?"
Similar situation.
And then it's okay. Mm-hmm. Anyway, well, again, it's the film what we've been talking about with my friend Lynne Sachs. It's called Film About a Father Who. And it's going to have its world premiere in January at Slam Dance, which is a great festival. Whilst across the town, or some blocks away, there's another festival going on, I understand. And then you have your big-time New York premiere at Doc Fortnite, which is extremely appropriate, I might add.
Thank you.
It's a great showcase for your films. It totally makes sense that you should have every New York premiere Well, it would be nice if you had occasionally one, let's say at New York Film Festival or something like that. But I think Doc Fortnite.
I have once at New York Film Festival. The last Happy Day showed there, and I showed a film called The Washing Society at BAM Cinema Fest,
which is a wonderful
cool
festival. It is a totally cool festival.
But I appreciate Doc Fortnite because I love the idea that the exploration of reality can be, as Grierson said, a creative process and can be shaped and sculpted and refracted, and I think the Museum of Modern Art kind of gets that. So
and nonfiction filmmaking is a broader subject than just documentary.
Yeah, and actually, my films don't show very much in straight. I mean, they never show in straight documentary festivals.
Right.
They never do.
Yeah.
So
you really put yourself in a situation.
And I'm like in a little teeny category.
Yeah. Well, there's
it's gotten bigger.
Yes, and there's a great history there too. I mean, it's an important history in film, and it's a veritable strain of film.
For the longest time, I've said I make experimental documentaries, and there weren't very many people who connected with that, and now there's so many. So I'm like grateful to have compatriots.
And the word experimental is kind of a hot button for so many people. So more people come on and they say it's a work of nonfiction, and leave out the word experimental because in a way. And in a way, it's understandable because is it really experimental if so many people are making these types of films anymore? What does the word experimental mean? But like trying something that nobody's doing and seeing how it goes, and it's an experiment.
Well, when I say experimental, it also is that I don't have any template whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that the material speaks back to me, and it is kind of like a science, like a research scientist. And you try this, and you're trying to find this answer, and then this fails, and there's so much failure.
You have 36. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Failures here, and 35 maybe.
Yeah, and you're constantly coming up to situations where people watch it and they say that doesn't work, and not just from other people but yourself, and I guess one of the hardest parts about this film was to find my place and how vulnerable I was willing to be, and how and that was one of the things Rebecca would really encourage me to do, was to try to write openly and not to be too self-protective and protective of my family or even my dad, but in the honesty of it, I think that I could hopefully find an integrity, but it was really hard.
So, wow, here you are. This is your 15th, or I don't know how many films you made. You made quite a few.
Well, a lot of them are very short.
And this is the hardest one. Right, no, but regardless, a lot of thought and planning go into them, and, regardless of TRT. But this is the hardest maybe the film you've ever made. Yeah,
it's definitely the hardest because, you have to navigate around the intellectual and artistic journey and then the personal journey.
Wow, yeah. It's intensely personal. So people should go see it and support this film. I don't know what else to say about it, but again, it will be at Slamdance, then Doc Fortnite. So we know already it's going to have these two great festival screenings. We'll keep track of it as the film continues.
Thank you, Adam, and to Filmwax.
You're welcome.
I like the name of your program.
Oh, thank you. And I really love staying in touch and having you back on over and over and keep exploring, continuing the conversation with you and with your brother. It so happens in very different ways, but it's really interesting experiment in and of itself in a way, to have that kind of relationship through these conversations. So we'll do it again, I guess.
I hope so. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Lynn.